morning, ladies and gentlemen. With thanks to Nutshell Conferences and Asfar Hassan, I would like to start this conversation with Dr. Ishrat Husain on his book, his latest publication, Development Pathways, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So I was lucky enough to get a copy of the book on 8th of November, and that made my holiday on 9th of November. And what could be a better way to spend that holiday in remembering Allama Iqbal, going through the journey of Pakistan over the last 75 years. So it's a wonderful read. I would encourage all of you to have a copy of the book. The Liberty stall is outside. You must get a copy and read it thoroughly. However, we will try to capture some key things from the book during this short session of 25 to 30 minutes. So before we start, I would like to just give you an idea that this is a comparative analysis of the economic and social development in 3 countries over the last 75 years. And I was talking to Dr. Saab before this event, and he told me how difficult it was to get separate data for East Pakistan and West Pakistan in the early part, like early 20 years when East Pakistan existed, and then he was able to get that data. Even World Bank did not have access to that detailed data. So mashallah, he's done a great job in terms of proving his point empirically. So he has shared in the book the development pathways followed by them, the critical success factors and lessons learned, and also the risk and pain points. So as this summit or this conference is about the way forward, this is a very good comprehensive review of what direction do we need to go into to be a successful economy going forward. Dr. Saab, you have very eloquently described in the books the distinct periods of economic journey of these countries, and there have been different periods, and certainly you will throw some light on that a bit later. But one thing that I would like to say is that I think one of the revelations to me personally by reading this book was that every time we look at India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, we hear about success stories of India and Bangladesh and failures of Pakistan as a state. But reading this book, it gave me a very positive attitude and positive understanding that there have been periods and there have been different areas where Pakistan has done tremendously well. And unfortunately, we have lost our view in the last few years. That's correct, in the last 3 decades. But there is a way forward. And if we go back to our basics, and we go back to basics and what we did correctly and what mistake did we make, it will be a good opportunity for us to excel other nations in this world. Dr. First question to you. So Pakistan has gone through different cycles of boom and bust, and every economy goes through that. But what we have observed that this has been more prominent in case of Pakistan. Our economy has been more volatile. Bangladesh has progressed very well in the last couple of decades, and similar has been the case with India, which did very well in the last 30 years. So unfortunately, it is only Pakistan that has seen deterioration over the last 3 decades. Now, this is a tricky question. So would you attribute this failure to political instability, lack of visionary leadership, poor governance, or erratic economic policies? I understand like everything breeds to the other, but if we have to identify 1 or 2 factors, what would you like to highlight today? Thank you. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me thank Asfar for organizing this particular event, for the discussion on 3 countries which had a unified economic infrastructure, economic contiguity, and they had legal, administrative, cultural affinities. And these 3 countries have really diverged as far as their whole development paradigm is concerned. But it is very interesting. You mentioned, and because there are younger people in this audience and some of the young adolescents also have not gone through the history of Pakistan's economy. So let me give the context in which Pakistan should be evaluated. Right now there is a lot of doom and gloom, and everybody, wherever I go, feels, well, that is the end of Pakistan's economic upsurgence. We will continue to remain because that is our destiny. But ladies and gentlemen, especially the younger people, 1947, Pakistan did not inherit even one single industrial unit. It was an agrarian society. It only got 100 civil servants who were the Muslims members of the ICS. And the Reserve Bank of India refused to give us our share of the resources of the reserves, despite the Governor General's verdict that Pakistan should get its own share out of the divisible pool. So it was the philanthropy of people like Adamji and Habib and others which carried Pakistan forward for a long period of time by paying even salaries. We didn't have the stationery, we didn't have the pencils, we didn't have the pen, we didn't have offices. And from that particular, starting point, which the Life magazine actually predicted with a picture of Quaid-e-Azam on the cover, that Pakistan will not last more than 6 months. It will be economically, a non-viable project, and it will collapse. That was the starting point. And from 1950 to 1990, despite this inheritance, which was very unfortunate for Pakistan, Pakistan was one of the fastest growing developing country in the world, among the top 10. And Pakistan's growth rate was 6 to 6.5% per annum for 40 years, while India was growing as what the development economists used to call the Hindu rate of growth, which was 3%. And Bangladesh, from 1971 to 1990, didn't grow at all. It was flat. So this was a country where a lot of people used to visit from outside and say, what is it that Pakistan is doing that it is progressing so well? And the poverty has gone down, while the poverty in India was still 50%, and in Bangladesh it was 70%. The living standards are much higher in Pakistan. So the book, coincidentally, is able to divide the entire period into two parts. And the reasons for the division are very different. Pakistan started as one of the fastest growing, and today it has become the laggard in South Asia. It is the slowest growing country. So if you take 1990 to 2022, Pakistan's performance has been below its potential and below its historical past. While at the same time, Jawaharlal Nehru was a very committed Fabian socialist. And he decided that he doesn't want the capitalist form of government, and he wants the state to control the commanding heights. So every decision about the economic progress or economic policies was made by the state. And the Planning Commission was deciding where you can allocate resources of foreign exchange or the interest rate or the banking loans, how much you can produce. I mean, the private sector didn't have any role to play in this. And therefore, you had a situation where till 1990, what the Indian paradigm was license Raj. And it was bankruptcy of India in 1991. One of the speakers in the earlier session pointed out, I think Amir Paracha, that they had to pledge their gold in order to get the resources. And the government of India decided that they have to demolish the old paradigm and go into a complete new paradigm, which is demolish the license Raj, unshackle the private sector, participate in international trade, attract foreign direct investment, invest in human capital, and reduce the footprint of the state. And since then, India has gone to 6 to 7% growth rate, which we used to have. But Shoaib, the point people forget is that this was not automatic. Narasimha Rao was a congressman. The Indian investors and the foreign investors didn't believe that India has gone through this shift. They waited till Vajpayee, a BJP opposition leader, became the prime minister. And he not only continued those policies, but went ahead with the privatization of the state-owned enterprises. So he even went one step further. And then, Manmohan Singh was the architect of the 1991 reforms, and he remained in power for 10 years. And Modi has actually done even better as far as the economic management is concerned, helping the private sector. He goes to the countries and says, ये मेरे investors हैं, ये आपके यहाँ business करना चाहते हैं. He's actually a spokesman for the private sector, and that's why $16 billion every year are invested by the Indian companies all over the world. The Tatas have Jaguar, and Mittal has Arcelor. And that example, Adani has port. I just visited Colombo, and Adani is constructing a state-of-the-art port because Modi went to Sri Lanka and said, we want to help you and this guy. Bangladesh, also till 1990, was on turbulence. They also adopted the same policies of state driving the economy. Because the West Pakistani industrialists, like Adamjis and Daus, their assets were confiscated. So they didn't want this to be in the private sector, so the government took over them. And as you know, when your government has control over productive assets, results are pretty bad. Then Sheikh Mujib, the founder of the country, was assassinated. And then there was coup after coup until 1991, when Ishrat went away and democracy was restored. Bangladesh also followed a liberalization policy and took off. While Pakistan, as I said, went the other way because the institutional capacity of Pakistan to deliver goods and services and to accelerate the economic growth had depleted for a variety of reasons, and which I've discussed in the book.
Thank you. So coming to taking a cue from your conversation about reduction of poverty or increasing in GDP per capita, in your book you have mentioned that when Pakistan and India got independence, 75% of the population was below poverty line. But today, that number is drastically reduced to roughly about 25% below poverty line. So, mashallah, all three countries have done very well in that aspect. But in terms of having an inclusive growth, in terms of reducing poverty, inclusive growth in terms of income inequality perspective, we have not done that well.
Right.
So what needs to be done to make this growth more inclusive? What are the steps or what is the recipe?
Actually, you raised a very critical point. And you remember in the book, I have pain points and risks for all the three countries.
Right.
Now, to me, growth per se, for the sake of growth, is totally irrelevant. Growth should be inclusive in the sense that the benefits of growth are shared by the majority of the population. And that is not happening in any three of the countries. India is worse. India is now more billionaires as compared to what they had in 1990s. And the top 20% of the income groups control 50% of the national income, while bottom 50% have only 20% of the national income. Regional disparities, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan have half or one-third of per capita incomes compared to Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Kerala. Social indicators in the south are comparable to East Asia. All the CEOs you see in the United States today of the big tech companies all come from the south. And then you have gender disparity in India also. I was amazed when I did the research, as you told everyone, that there was no comparable data which defines as to what the indicators are. So we had to collect the data. And what surprised me personally, I've been going to India since 1980s constantly, and I thought the women in India were pretty progressive, and they are quite active in the labor force. You know, the labor force participation rate of the women in India and Pakistan is the same, 23%. And Bangladesh is 38%. And that to me is one of the pain points for India. So gender disparity, regional disparity, and income disparity. They have widened in India. On the other extreme is Bangladesh. Bangladesh has actually taken pains to improve their family planning services, their education and their health, nutrition, cleanliness, environment in the households, with the help of the NGOs. You remember Professor Yunus got a Nobel Prize for the microcredit, which empowered 80% of the women to get loans for their own enterprises. BRAC, under Sir Fazlul Hasan Abid, produced a whole network of primary schools in the rural Bangladesh, which was not done either in India or Pakistan. So the gender disparity and income disparity would be, in my view, according to the data, pretty low as far as Bangladesh is concerned. But my recent visit, I just was there for launch of my book. I see that the real estate, because the land is very, very congested, the area is very low. The people who had a plot of land, their own houses, they have gone for multi-storied buildings, and therefore they have become rich overnight. And to me, this tendency means that income disparities in Bangladesh are also rising. But I have no data for that, but that's just an observation which I have. Pakistan, because I have, and you must have read my book, The Economy of an Elitist State, has always been under the influence of a small elite class to which you and I belong to. We should not sort of hesitate to accept the responsibility. We are always trying to rig the markets for our own personal parochial benefits, and we are capturing the state, the same elite class, for getting the largesse, the rents, the concessions, the tax exemptions, the tax evasions, all for our own purposes. Therefore, the elite capture in Pakistan is very strong. Except Quetta, all the districts in Balochistan have high poverty rates. Their social indicators are poor. The female enrollment ratios in Balochistan is pathetic. We haven't paid attention to them. And unless we do that, we are going to have regional disparities, and we are going to have gender disparities, and because of the elite capture, the lobbyists in the big business have amassed a lot of wealth, which is not in Pakistan. The difference between Bangladesh and Pakistan is that they've invested their earnings and the rents. They also get concessions. I'm not denying that the Bangladeshi industrialists didn't get the concessions from the government, but they invested. So today, you have $55 billion of garment exports. Yes. They don't grow even one bale of cotton.
Yes, absolutely.
Because they invested. And all the foreigners also came in. That is the difference between the three countries. And I'm worried about all the three countries as far as inclusive growth is concerned, because this is not the pattern for economic growth.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Talking about exports, as you rightly mentioned, Bangladesh is doing $55 billion of exports. And they identified that niche market, they developed it very well. India utilized its low-cost labor educated class to actually promote the information technology exports, and they are doing wonders in there. Ever since I came into the business world, or I started my service, I've been hearing that Pakistan has been focusing on 5 export sectors, 5 priority areas. But I wonder why those priority areas have not done well, and maybe have we chosen the wrong priority sectors, or what is the problem here?
Let me tell you the Pakistani experience. Every country looks at the sunrise industries where the global demand is rising. And you invest domestically in order to cater to that needs. If you look at the composition of Pakistan's exports in the 1990s, it was 55% textiles. Leather, sports, surgical goods, same pattern.
Right.
Today, it is the same pattern. It hasn't changed. We haven't gone into electronics. We haven't gone into semiconductors. We haven't gone in engineering goods. We haven't gone in pharma, which are the sunrise industries. Because the public policies favor these established, entrenched vested interests. And I'm guilty, I must tell you this. As a governor, on the export concession policies, although the export tripled during our period for a variety of reasons, but I should have said enough. I debarred the spinners from the long-term concessional financing for exports. But I should have said, I don't want to continue with the traditional exports. I want the non-traditional exports to get the concessions for a limited period of time. So I confess that I also made a mistake, and I think that mistake continues even after every regime, because they are very powerful people. The second point I would like to tell you is our erratic economic policies. I went to Faisalabad in 2015, and the exporters there were almost on the verge of crying. They said, we have orders from our buyers for Christmas. We want the government to give us allocation for electricity. This was the period when there was a lot of load shedding.
Load shedding was there.
And give priority as far as the gas is concerned, so we can fulfill their orders. And they said, once we are unable to do that, the buyers will go to Cambodia, they will go to Bangladesh, they will go to Vietnam, where they are assured the delivery will be made for Christmas. Because if you deliver after Christmas, it is of no use to the buyers. Then you have overvalued exchange rate. For a long period of time, you are depleting your reserves in order to maintain a certain exchange rate, which is detrimental for exports, but is inducing more imports, because imports become cheaper.
Right, right.
So these erratic policies are responsible for our growth or lack of growth of the export sector. I made a calculation, Shoaib. We had reached $25 billion of exports in 2010. And I said, if we continue the same growth rate as the past, in 2021, when I was in the government, I presented to them that our exports would have been $46 billion. So your current account deficit would have been wiped out completely. You didn't have to borrow from IMF or from others, so your external debt would have been come. Bangladesh had a steady growth, as you see in the book. India had a steady growth. We had this and that, and that's why. आपकी चिट्ठी आ गई है, तो अब आप
5 minutes.
आपने जो सवाल पूछना है तो पूछिए.
Couple of important questions, sir. I'll come to IMF in a minute, but I would like to talk first about human capital development.
Yeah, right.
As many of the esteemed speakers before us also talked about, that 65% of the population is below 30 years of age. That's a huge asset for us. What are we doing about that asset?
Correct.
And if are we what do we need to do to provide them the right education? Because 20 million children are out of school.
Right.
And the other part of the question, which I want to combine the two questions now, is that once they are in the market for job opportunities, how are we? This is again a big challenge for all the three countries. But I would like to talk to you about specifically about Pakistan.
Yeah.
How are we? What are we going to do, or what do we need to do to provide job opportunities to these people? Because I know that, like for example, in terms of even higher education, 10 years ago when I was the president of the CFS Society, we had about 3,000 candidates from Pakistan. Today the number has actually reduced because there are no job opportunities, unfortunately. So please, thank you.
Well, this problem of employment is common to all the three countries. Yeah. India adds 12 million young men and women to the labor force every year. And you know the whole IT industry, which is one of the buoyant industry, which is expanding and the second largest exporter, employs only 5 million people. That's the stock. I'm not talking of the flows.
That's right.
Where are you getting all the employment? Informal sector. 80% of the jobs in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh are created in informal sector where productivity is low. So the migration from the rural to the urban areas, according to Arthur Lewis, will only accelerate the growth rate when you move from the low productive sector to the high productive. What you're doing here, you're going from low productivity sector to become hawkers, khonchewala, thelewala, all these which are low productivity. And this is patterned in all the three countries. So I'm quite concerned, as you saw in my book on the pain points. What I want to emphasize, which is a very different view of the world as compared to the brain drain, I believe in brain circulation. And my thesis is as follows. Japan is already on a declining path of 0.7% fertility decline. Korea is on a declining path. These are pure, culturally monolithic countries which have never allowed the foreigners to come in.
Right.
They are now asking Pakistan, India and Bangladesh to supplement their labor force. Because if they don't supplement their labor force, their growth rate is going to decline. The dependency ratio is already 2 working persons to support 1 retiree. That's not a viable situation. So they've asked Pakistan, India, because we are youthful population, 60% is below 30, to provide them those skilled labor which are in demand in their countries. So if I were the minister for overseas Pakistanis, I would negotiate bilateral agreements that this is the amount of persons which we would provide, and then line up all our educational institutions. I mean, we have colleges which are empty after, 12:31. There is nobody there. You use the existing facilities, you don't have to. And today the online learning is so powerful that you need a facilitator who can give you the kind of training. And then you have a lot of NGOs which are now working on vocational and technical training. So you equip your young men and women with the kind of skills which are needed. Now, the Japanese ambassador who went away who was transferred when I was in, he told me, Mr. Husain, we have asked the government of Pakistan to provide us 30,000 IT graduates by 2030. Our mission came here and they found there are only 2 universities in Pakistan which are up to our standards, up to our mark. And they produce only 400 graduates. Even if we take away all the 400 graduates, we won't be able to meet the 30,000 target. So what should I do? And what should you do? You go to all the colleges and universities, and today you don't need degrees. You have Google certification, you have Amazon certification, you have Microsoft certification, you have Python, you have ready-made skills which the IT professionals can do. Web development, software applications, there are a whole skill set. So you don't say कि 4 साल आप डिग्री करो, इनको 3 महीने के, 4 महीने के, 6 महीने के courses दो, certificate दो, they will be qualified for that. That is the planning. And out of 800,000 which go out, you should have 400,000 who are the skilled workers. So you're creating a ease on your employment problem. You are increasing your remittances because the skilled laborers send more money per capita as compared to the unskilled labor, and you are meeting the needs of your friends in the Western world. The Western world is now on a declining path, and I have data for each country. The third country which is going to go, negative is Germany. That is what our path should be.
Just one last question before we conclude the session. So you just talked about we have to go back to IMF again and again. And there are two group of people, two thoughts actually, schools of thought. One group of thought is that when we go to IMF program, we don't implement the reforms they suggest. And that's why we have to go back again. The other school of thought is that if IMF is certainly, all the policies of the IMF are basically contracting in nature, so it stifles the growth, and that is again a challenge or a dilemma we face. What's your take on it?
Now, you are a highly educated professional. Now, if the IMF asks you that your fiscal deficit should be reduced from 8 to 10% to 4%, your tax GDP ratio, which is exempts 60% of your economic sectors, real estate, retail, transport, agriculture, and property taxes. They don't want additional burden on the corporate sector, which is already paying. Actually, the tax rate should be reduced for the corporate sector. What's wrong with that? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They say your state-owned enterprises, and I produced a report, which is on the Ministry of Finance website, SOE Triage, where we said which enterprises should be retained in the government, but should be restructured. Some of them are not earning the opportunity cost of capital, so their financial model has to be changed. There are others who have to be privatized through the stock market flotation, through concession agreements, and through management contracts. Don't have to sell the assets. You can give the discos for management contract, and you have success factors. If you reduce the T&D losses by such and such point, this is how much you would get. If you recover from 95% to 98%, this is your reward. This is a transparent basis. What is wrong with that? That's what the fund is doing. And they endorsed my report that this is what we should be doing. If they are telling you that you should give more money for Benazir income support program and for the poor, and the subsidies should not be across the board, but through the best to the poor, you're saving a lot of money. Why should I get the subsidy, and you should get the subsidy for petroleum products or for gas or for electricity. We don't deserve it. Now, what is wrong with that? We should be doing this on our own and putting our house in order rather than running and then blaming the IMF for all our evils. So I think this is a lesson I want to leave with you, that अगर आप डाइटिंग कर रहे हैं और आप एक्सरसाइज कर रहे हैं, आपने अपनी हेल्थ की तरफ तवज्जो दी है, तो आपको डॉक्टर के पास जाने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. मगर आपने अगर सारी चटोरबाजी भी की है और आप एक्सरसाइज भी नहीं कर रहे हैं, तो आप डॉक्टर के पास जाएंगे. ये इकॉनमी का भी हाल है. आप टैक्स नहीं जमा करेंगे, आप एक्सपेंडिचर जो है वो बढ़ाते चले जा रहे हैं, तो फिर यही हशर होगा कि आपको डॉक्टर के पास जाना पड़ेगा. डॉक्टर कहता है अभी गोली, कड़वी गोली खा लो, वो कहते नहीं मैंने कड़वी गोली नहीं खानी है. उसके बाद फिर आप उसके पास भाग के जाते हैं, वो कहता है आप इंजेक्शन ले लो, आप कहते हैं मैंने इंजेक्शन भी ले लें, आप ICU में पड़े हुए हैं, फिर आपकी सर्जरी होगी. दैट इज़ व्हाट द प्रोग्रेशन इन पाकिस्तान इज़ एज फार एज द IMF programs are concerned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. I wish we had more time.